This lovely little miniature is Sophronitis cernua. It's now Cattleya cernua, as most of the Sophronitis are. A real miniature, this one. This has put on a lot of new roots recently. It bloomed very, very well last year, the best it's ever done, basically from new growths. Now at the moment there's no signs of new growths, but the root activities there, the new growths will follow. This is Epidendrum nocturnum, and its spike is pushing on quite nicely. It's produced quite a lot of new roots recently, all nicely attached and everything, so I'm pleased with the progress on this particular plant. It does seem to have a habit of getting a little bit of sunken areas on the leaves, which is a trifle worrying, but if it's growing as good as that with that sort of root system, maybe it's a natural trait, I don't know. Maybe it's a deficiency, maybe it's too much water, too much temperature. There's all sorts of things it flipping could be, but looking forward to this one blooming. And these have a habit of self-pollinating, so when it blooms I need to get at it quick with both cameras, the still for my records and a video to actually make sure everybody else gets a look at it, because last time it lasted a day and then collapsed because it self-pollinated. But I'll make sure it gets on film this time. Looking forward to that. The bloom was lovely, but literally one day later it was gone. This is Dendrobium hercoglossum, and this is behaving differently this year. For the first time in 3 or 4 years, it's done its mass blooming. It's still got quite a few buds to come, so it's far from finished, and it's got infant spikes in places, so the blooming period is going to continue for some considerable time. And this plant used to worry me because I was always amazed it could support such a large plant on such a tiny little root base. It's just coming into growth, so this is this year's canes just starting. I can see 3 at the moment. There'll probably be more, and that will be followed by some new roots, but they never grow that big. It's always self-contained on its mount. Very rarely do the roots extend beyond the moss. Yeah, so it supports a very large plant on very little roots. Strange growth pattern. The canes push upwards, and then, like, these are last year's growths here, and then gradually they become heavy enough to become pendulous until eventually they get down here. But if you look at these, this is in fact a kiki here. God, that's enormous. That needs coming off. That's got a good root system, open leaves, and actively growing. You know, that needs setting up as a new plant. But yeah, blooms are dropping off as I touch this. But let me find an area that's got new blooms. Let's have a closer look. This is an area that's just opened its blooms. It's tiny, but still one of my favourites. The only thing that's missing on this plant that would make it, as far as my opinion is concerned, absolutely perfect, is it's not fragrant. Well, mine isn't. But I love this plant. I've had it many years. It's always performed well. And it's a 3-year cycle on the canes. Year 1, new growths, pushing upwards. Yeah. Year 2, getting heavier, still growing. Year 3, still growing. And then year 4, it'll dump its leaves. Well, during the winter before year 4. And then you've got bare canes that still produce blooms. So, star performer for me, this one, absolutely. Love it. Well, this is Dendrobium nesta, which is an anosmum cross, and this is just coming to the end of its blooms now. It grew 3 canes last year, one reasonably long, one not quite so long, and one shorter. All 3 bloomed nicely, well pleased. It's just coming into growth mode now. It's got 2 lovely strong new canes. I'd like to have seen more, but these started a little earlier in the year, so in theory, feed and water well, they should be at least as long as the longest canes I've had on this. It's physically not so much the number of canes on this, but the length of the cane that determines the amount of blooms you're going to get, because it blooms literally from the tip of the cane right back up you know, to just a few inches from the base. So I would be quite happy with 2 really long canes this year. It still may produce more new growths, who knows, but at the moment 2 good strong ones pushing out. And this one is Dendrobium anosmum at the actual species, just coming to the end of its blooming. I got this at the very beginning of last year. It was obviously out of season. Quite honestly, when I got it, it had all the hallmarks of just being hacked off a tree, which worried me a bit. Literally, a lot of old canes on it, and the root system had just been chopped about 1.5 inches from the base, so they'd all been just hacked off. So I was worried it was even going to grow, but it grew this cane, which bloomed this year, so that was good. It also pushed out a winter growth which failed, and it pushed this one out very late in the year, so it's obviously out of season, and this one didn't progress in full. There's no reason why that won't bloom next year, even though it's a short cane. And this year so far we've got 1 good strong new growth coming. So and during the late part of winter, it chucked out a mass of new roots, so it's nice and firmly attached now. It's got a good root system, so from now on it should be a nice strong plant. I really don't know what to do with this thing. It was one of the bulbophyllums that Archie gave me. It's Bulbophyllum phalaenopsis, and the leaves are enormous. This is not even a big leaf for this plant, despite being huge. It's only ever had 1 bulb with 1 leaf, and strictly speaking it should be growing the other way up. The leaves are supposed to hang down, but if you think about attempting to mount a big fat bulb like that, that's going to be incredibly difficult. And unfortunately this is a contradiction. This is warm to hot growing, yeah? So obviously this can't stay out here in the winter, so it had to come in the house. But it's warm and steamy, which it isn't in the house. So this attempted a bloom, pitiful, but it did actually have a spike, it just didn't open properly. It then attempted a new growth which rotted, and at that point it had no roots, it was just a bulb and a leaf. Well, it has actually got roots now, and there is some root activity going on, but there is still no sign of a new growth. And it needs to be mounted so that it can hang. I can't do that. So it's an anomaly. I don't really want it. But then to give it to somebody else, you have to bear in mind this is a warm to hot grower that likes high humidity and doesn't like bright light. This is a genuine shady plant. So where the hell could I put it in here, where it can get the best of the heat, accommodate it in the winter, and keep that magic humidity nice and high? So I just can't look after this, even if it did push up a new growth. But if I see a new growth, then it would be offered to others, but it needs to go to somebody who can grow warm and humid and give this some shade, and that's not what everybody's got. So a funny one, that one. And these are my 3 phalaenopsis type dendrobiums. I used to have 6, and I've still got 6 in my notes, but I'm still waiting for that shirker at the back to push up a bloom to identify which one it is. So I've got pictures of all of them, but I don't know. They weren't labelled. This one, however, this nearly got thrown out. It just got saved by the skin of its teeth. It has managed 2 new canes last year. No, sorry, on this one, 1 new cane. But it was a good one compared with what was there before. So that saved its neck, quite honestly, because it was looking really poor. This has recently been repotted, mainly to get the flipping thing to stand upright, and it does now have a single new cane. And there are signs of some new roots coming in places. So saved by the skin of its teeth, that one. And this is Dendrobium primulinum. This one taught me a lesson. This one, not the winter just gone, the winter before that. I tried to do the winter rest with it on a weak plant, and I nearly killed it. By the time I came out of winter, the canes were badly shriveled, all the leaves were gone, and it spent a long time sulking in that way. But it did manage. I think it grew one cane last year, but this year so far we've got 3 good strong growths pushing on. So I've saved the plant, that's the good bit, and whether some of those old canes will ever bloom I don't know. But nonetheless, once these get to the appropriate time, which is probably late winter, early spring, they should bloom. They've got a whole growing season to extend, so that should push on nicely now, having been on the brink of brown bread. Well, that last one was Dendrobium Thai Angel. I had to move it because it's so unsteady in its pot. Slightest touch and it'll probably just fall out. This one also just about saved its neck. This was on the cusp of being thrown out, and I just spotted 2 new growths. One of them was poor and hasn't bloomed, but there is a nubbin in the thing there, so it may do down the line. And the other cane was quite good, quite strong. No sign of any new canes at this point in time. It is growing a few roots, but I wouldn't call it many. And this cane did progress and produce a spike. And as the spike progressed, every single bud blasted except for the last one. This is on its way out now, it's fading fast, but probably been in bloom 2.5 months. It seems to have been in bloom most of the winter, and I suspect the reason those buds blasted was the period when it was getting exceptionally cold in here at night, and these don't like getting cold. But there's only so much room in the house, I can only take so many in. And these got left out here, and that was probably too cold for them, simple as that. But it managed to push one bud out, so at least I know which one that is now. It's the white one. And this other one over here, bug damage got left at the back. Once it's done, it's done. That's the severe case. I've got a feeling that's a cane that's not mine anyway. And this is attempting to grow. I mean, some of the new growths during last year just didn't grow. They didn't go at all. But then it managed to produce that one, which isn't bad. And then it managed to produce this one, which is better. No new growths currently on the go, but new roots starting. Yeah, I mean, this one has got some roots. It's not like it's rootless. But yeah, I mean, it's highly likely to bloom there, and it may well bloom there. When it does, I get to find out which one it is. I'm hoping it's the... I had 2 that were virtually identical as far as the blooms were concerned, except in size and the amount of purple. The blooms were basically white with the deepest purple centres blending out towards the edges. But one had larger blooms, which I think was called Polar Fire, and the other one looked identical but less purple and smaller blooms. I think it's one of those 2, but I've got to wait for blooms to find out. But no active new growth as yet on that one. Maxillaria sophronites, and it's a climber, it's rampant, and when it gets going it grows like a flipping weed. Lots of pieces taken off a mount and stuck in a pot to see what it would do. And well, you can see what it's doing. It's going mad. It's growing upwards and outwards, and that's just what it's going to do. Somebody once told me if you put it at the base of a wall, it will take over the wall because it'll climb up it and latch onto it. But this blooms at the base of new growths, and this blooms on and off for me. It's had 1 bloom so far this year that I saw it just as it faded, because this one, once it was repotted, was staying wet quite a long time, so it wasn't getting looked at that often. I could see without picking the pot up that, you know, as I went round watering, I thought, no, you can wait, you're still wet. But now it's using its water, so it does need watering at the same frequency as the other plants. I mean, you can see the amount of new growth on there. I'm not going to attempt to count them. But down the line, as these growths mature, we will get some of those tiny little bright red flowers with the yellow centre. They are gorgeous but tiny. Hopefully it will produce quite a few of them all at once, which will be a little spectacle. Emphasis on the little. But boy, is this a rampant grower when it gets going. Now, this is Dendrobium aphyllum, and although that cane is 2.5 feet long, that was in fact a kiki, a 2.5 foot long kiki, a very appreciated present from Alberto in sunny Italy, where they had snow in the winter time. But nonetheless, it bloomed on that kiki, and I was over the moon because that was unexpected. It's currently pushing out a kiki that once it gets a reasonable root system, I will take off of the cane and bring back here and plant. The fact that it's a kiki and it's produced a nice new growth and it bloomed and it's now producing a massive new roots from the base of the plant, you couldn't really ask for more. One thing I've just done with this is looked it up, and this one is not a high light lover in its growing season, and as you can see we managed to get the hint of purple on this one. So this one's just had its position changed from facing the brightest light to facing away from it. I've got a simple little trick here. These racks effectively run, the sun is this side basically, so the sun comes in from here. So these are facing the brightest light, whereas these have got their back to it. That's what I mean by changing the position, and this rack works exactly the same way. And the aphyllum was on this side, and it's showing signs of a bit high light, just a little touch too much, so it now lives around this side where it's got its back to the bright light. It's still good light, you know, don't get me wrong, I haven't put it in the dark, but it's a different type of light with its back to the brightest light. And yeah, I'm hoping that one's going to push on nicely. It's already excelled my expectations by actually blooming, so that was brilliant. And nice good strong new cane, good new root system pushing out, and I'll be interested in the progress. But the kiki will come back up here onto the mount so that it'll plump up the plant basically. I had to come back into the lounge to get this one in. The cane is from here right up to here with a curve on it as well. Massive cane on this one, and I've always said you can't get it right all the time. I had this one down as a winter rester. This is Dendrobium glomeratum, and getting a little bit more information on this, although it would be a bit drier in the winter, it doesn't normally get that cold, and basically I rested it. And I couldn't work out why this cane just kept growing all through the winter, as did this one, and still is. And the reason was, it wasn't resting, even though I was desperately trying to rest it. So this one will come out of that section now. This isn't a true winter rester, it's just a bit drier in the winter and doesn't like to get too cold. Yeah, I mean, this one hasn't bloomed for some considerable time. There's no reason why this cane won't bloom at the appropriate time, and this one will follow on again possibly at the same time, but may take an extra year on that cane. No signs of new growth at the base yet, but effectively, you know, this is the new growth, which started about the middle of last year. So it's a strange one. Right, that's about as far away as I can get, and I still haven't got the whole thing in. This, endearingly known as the bush, because that's exactly what it is, has got to go out on the work list. It's got to be repotted. I'm dreading it. It's such a large plant, and the only thing I think I can do with this is I'm literally going to strap every single cane together in several places and squash them all up together. It won't matter, because the growth on the canes hangs outwards, and it does have a unusual growth pattern. It grows canes up, if you follow this one, and then they branch, and they produce unexpected blooms, because I wasn't expecting them, which are all fading now. They're all on their way out, and there's no more buds I can see. So the canes then branch, yeah, and those bits extend and then become heavy enough to arch over. And that's how you get this sort of bamboo look, which is very attractive, I must admit. You can do without the little white bits. So I do like the plant. It's just enormous. I can't mount that because if you think about these pendulous bits here are, what, 18 inches long, and they start here. So that would add 18 inches onto it from there. Where the hell am I going to hang that? It would be from the roof practically down to the floor, so I can't mount it. And quite honestly, this is how it's supposed to look. Yeah? The canes extend, arch over, produce branches that then arch over. That's how it grows. So by strapping the whole thing centrally, I might be able to get it to stand up in a pot. That is the pot it was originally in, and it is producing a lot of new roots at the moment, so now's the time to get at it. I don't see any new growths yet, but they'll probably come soon. I haven't had the plant long enough to know its growth pattern, but that's probably what's going to happen. And then that pot was stood inside a clay pot with a rock in the bottom, and it still wouldn't stand up. So I filled the clay pot with grit to see if that would do it, and it still wouldn't stand up. So I then put it inside that's a cymbidium pot, that black one, so it's deep. And that's got a couple of big rocks in the bottom. And then to hold the clay pot still, that was side filled with grit for extra weight. Well, now it stands up fine. But what I'm going to do with it when I repot it, I really don't know, because getting it to stand up is going to be a serious problem. And I don't want it in a huge pot. It's a dendrobium. They don't like to be over potted, but it may well get stuck in the clay pot that it's actually stood in now, and we'll give that a go. Anyway, it's going out with the others on the to-do list. It might not be today, but it's got to be done, difficult though it's going to be. But it's got to be done. There's no point in leaving it in old media when the new roots are coming out. That's just wasting an opportunity. So, but I was pleased that it bloomed. Long-lasting, honey fragrance, attractive and unexpected in this particular case. But anyway, we'll see what we can do with this. It seems to bloom on the older parts of the arched canes. Yeah. So if that's true, then we're going to have a lot of places for buds to come next year, or during the winter, whenever it's its proper time, because there are an awful lot of the canes in that state that have grown on, the branches are pushing on, and they're going to arch down soon. So there's a lot of growth that potentially can bloom. Good stuff, but a massive plant. That's Dendrobium hancockii. Now this sorry looking object was one of the big box orchids from Beatrix that suffered the sub-zero temperatures in transport, and although I mounted this one, I mounted it with the expectation that it was actually dead. Well, the cane itself certainly isn't. It's now producing 2 kikis. But I've been saying for some time, oh by the way, I believe that tag goes with that plant because it got separated, so Dendrobium linguella, or guella, however you want to say it. And I keep looking at the base. Although it had roots, they didn't seem alive, and I keep saying there's no sign of life at the base. Well, at last there is. You probably can't see it, but at the very top of the base, pointing upwards, is a green shoot. Not dead yet then. Oh, they are full of surprises, Dendrobiums. They can look dead for months on end and then suddenly shoot out. So it's not dead. It's pushing out a new growth at the base and kikis on the cane. The state of the plant is a mess, basically. I mean, those leaves look awful. But it's a deciduous dendrobium. They're destined to fall off at some point, probably sooner than later in this case. But it's saved. You know, there's life in the cane, enough to get kikis out, and now we have a tiny little new growth at the base. So hopefully it's going to make it now. Well, this is the Vanda my daughter bought for me. It has very tightly clustered bright orange flowers, and it's along the lines of Ascocenda Orange Delight, but whether it truly is or not, I'll never know. There's so many hybrids that are so similar, it's almost impossible to tell. And strictly speaking, an Ascocenda is a cross between an Ascocentrum, which have now virtually all been reclassified as Vandas, and then crossed with a Vanda. So it's probably a Vanda now, and it's just a Vanda. This one has a spike. I noticed it the other day, somewhere down in here. Oh, there it is. So that's its first spike this year. That'll be blurred because I'm too close. It's put on a reasonable amount of top growth through the winter, which is quite good. Its latest leaf pushing on here and another new one starting. Quite honestly, this blooms 3 times a year. It's always been a good one for me, and grows well. Lots of root tips, older roots branching. And yeah, it does quite well. And see if I can turn it round the other side of the plant. First time ever on one of my Vandas, I have a kiki at the base of the plant. So that should push on as well. And in a few years' time, another place for some spikes to come from. Well, this is the Vanda that has the gigantic purple blooms on, tessellated purple. And the last spike on this stayed in bloom for most of the winter. This is the one that had the serious problem that I'm still hoping was nothing more than it being susceptible to cold. I did get that time when the heater didn't kick on and the grow room got down to about 8 degrees. That's too cold for Vandas. Some Vandas are more cold tolerant than others. All 3 Vandas, fed, watered, kept in the same place. This one suffered, and I'm hoping that's all it is. And it's reasonably certain because the latest leaves are fine. But for cold damage, it appeared in a strange place. But it's cell damage, definitely. The surface of the leaves have completely gone. When I put this up as a problem, some people said spider mites. Well, that it isn't. And although a serious infestation of some other bugs may well have done that, that still looks like cold damage to me. Its cell structure, the surface of that leaf has just gone. That's the worst one, that's why I'm showing that one. Some others have just got blotching in various stages, but that was the worst leaf. Seems to be growing on quite well now. It's chucking out roots all over the place. Many branches on existing roots, and if I can turn it round, some nice big fat new ones coming out at the base. Yeah, so it grows well, and I can still only accept the fact that that's cold damage. If it was a virus, it would carry on spreading throughout the plant, and it would most likely have taken down the growing area, whereas the top of the plant's growing well. It's never going to be a looker anymore, is it? But that doesn't mean to say it can't bloom. So although it may not be able to go out to play ever again because of the state it's in, we can still enjoy the bloom. So it's growing well, chucking out roots, and the top growth's clean. So happy with that. My third Vanda, this is one that has the very large white flowers with the very pale grey tessellations and the deep purple lip. This has got a nice spike pushing on now, and some excellent new roots coming out from nearer the base of the plant, and root branches in other places. So root growth reasonable. Some of the leaves down the bottom of the plant are getting a bit old and tired now. They will probably drop sometime during this year, but it's got good top growth coming on it, and a nice spike, so coming on well. Now this was labelled as Masai Red, but it isn't, because it's got patterning on the lip, so it's probably Masai Red Splash, and was labelled wrong. This got real bad mould in the pot, loads of white dots and smelt of mushrooms, so it had to be repotted. It then objected to that quite strongly because it wasn't in active root growth, so it dumped most of its old roots. Well, it's successfully replaced those, so it now has a good pot full of roots, and it now has a stonking new growth coming on it, so that's fine. Just did a quick visual on that. Any scale? No. Oh, that dead sheath can come off. There they are. Yeah. And those are the crawlers. Those are the ones that can move from plant to plant. Yeah. Now this one was in a totally separate area. It wasn't with all the others that I've just come across the scale, but it obviously already had the odd one or two before I moved it. And having moved it to a separate area, you know, that's how they spread. So anyway, the leaves are clean on here. And then I don't think they're down in the bulb. They're certainly not on the new growth. I can't see any around the base of the plant. So maybe just one adult got inside that sheath and those are the latest hatchlings, so I've probably just caught that plant in time. So there's nothing down in that sheath. So that's the rate of spread. That's probably just one adult, possibly that on the end of my finger, that's then laid eggs and hatched out crawlers. And as you can see, there's a lot of them. And they're mobile. They will crawl around trying to find a place where they're happy. Now they can't stay there. As creatures, they need to bite into some nice juicy fleshy stuff to live. And that's dead. So I think those are just about to start moving around. Well, they're not now, they're dead. Well, they will be any minute. So even though that plant looked clean, they were in there, and the places they get are down in there. And so the best way to stop them getting down in there is take the flipping things off, like that. Now they can't get down in there. There's nowhere to hide. That means at least they're visible. So yeah, they're getting about. I'm on top of them, but they are getting about. So for this one, the leaves are good, the new growth's good. If there's any still lurking, they're going to be round the base of the plant, so I'll just give that area a spray as a precaution, but I think I've just caught these in time. Well, these are my two Rhynchostylis giganteas, both in the same pot. One has bloomed, one hasn't, and these dehydrated for all the wrong reasons, because I had this basket full up with bark. It was staying wet far too long, which was the demise of the root system basically. These need a lot of hydration, but they need to dry fast too. So basically it's now bare rooted effectively in a basket for a bit of security. It grows the odd root here and there, not very often, but yeah, the newer leaves on the top of the plant aren't so bad. I wouldn't say they're good, and the one at the back's just producing a new leaf. But the whole plant just dehydrated over quite a long period, and the older leaves on this are never going to rehydrate. I was worried about the coloration on the leaves, but apparently the striping effect on these is natural. Not the desiccation, no. These should have nice big healthy strappy looking leaves, yeah, which it hasn't got at the moment. So I'm looking at new leaves as they come out. Did have some bug damage earlier in its life, but yeah, very slow grower. I'll just see how that goes on. But this one gets hydrated every single day, irrespective of the other plants. So even if I don't actually dunk the Vandas in the bucket, this gets dunked every day. And then it dries, and then it gets done again. And that's apparently what they would prefer. So I'm hoping subsequent newer growth on this is healthy and strong, and the leaves don't twist and turn and get desiccated. But time will tell. This is Rhynchorydes Bangkok Sunset. I haven't actually had this too long, and boy is this slow on the old root front, but it's put on some reasonable top growth since I got it, and is currently doing a new leaf, but very, very slow on the root front. It's got roots that can hydrate the plant, yes, but as far as new roots are concerned, that's a branching root, and somewhere down in there there's another one. Well, it actually wrapped itself around the bottom of the basket, but very slow on root production, this one. It's actually quite a slow grower, but nonetheless the plant looks healthy, and it was in bloom when I got it. It hasn't done it since, so I'm sort of waiting on that now. But it's certainly blooming size. It was in bloom when I got it, but it hasn't done it since, and I don't know when it will, quite honestly. But the plant's growing nicely. I just wish it had a better root system. But anyway, I keep it well hydrated and dries out thoroughly in between, and it's growing on. Now, this is a lovely example of a deciduous dendrobium. It's doing everything properly. This is Dendrobium friedrichsianum, and these are last year's growths. Yeah, still fully leaved. They'll dump their leaves as we go into autumn and winter. The year before, dumped their leaves at that time the year before, and are now bursting into bloom as they do. These should be open soon. They're just starting to show their colour. I'm looking forward to that. There's a lot of buds. And then this year's growths are just beginning. I've just had a count up. There's 8 new canes, because some of them are tucked right in the back there. There's at least 8 new canes coming, and those will progress, and then as they get heavier they'll become pendulous, replace these will replace these, and so it goes. These are the oldest canes here, yeah, the tiny ones. That's probably the ones that were on it when I got it. But this plant's progressing at a predictable rate and a good rate, yeah. 8 new growths to replace these as these go on. That was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It looks like 6 new canes, maybe 7 last year, at least 8 this year. So progression, and the year following the leaf dump in the autumn is followed by blooms, but not late winter, early spring blooms. This one does bloom a bit later in the year than a lot of dendrobium types, the winter resting types. So the blooms on this one are more like late spring, early summer, but nonetheless it's still triggered in effect by the winter resting period. Lovely orchid, that one. That's growing well for me. Back in the lounge again to get this biggie in. This is a monster. This is Dendrobium chryseum, and what I was hoping were going to be blooms are going to be kikis, but nonetheless there's a shed load of them. They're producing roots. Once the leaves open and the roots get going, I'll have a load of these off and start probably several new plants that can be passed on. This one had spider damage prior to me getting it. It's clean now. But the damage is there on some of the older leaves, but it's a deciduous dendrobium. Those leaves will drop eventually, and the good thing is they're going to get replaced by this lot up here. I've just had a count round. There's 20 plus, because I keep losing count, new canes starting at the base of the plant. They're coming out all in under there, round the front, right round the side. They've got new growths coming out everywhere, and at the base of those new growths the new roots are just starting, because although this had roots that hydrate okay, they weren't good roots. You can see a lot of them even lost their vellum. They're not good roots, but nonetheless they're about to be replaced, and there's more than enough working well enough to keep this plant hydrated long enough for it to replace its root system. So yeah, pushing on at a rate of knots, the new growths on that. New acquisition, so not bloomed for me. I don't even know the time of year it's actually supposed to bloom, but at the moment my priority is getting that lot to grow, and hopefully the weight of the canes will bring them over and make them pendulous, because if they're going to be 3 foot long hanging down and 3 foot long sticking up, I need 6 foot of space, which I haven't got. So I really do want these canes to arch over. Well, we'll see how we go. All I can do is feed and water well, get it going, and we'll see how it progresses as the year goes on. Okay, and that's it. There are 2 orchids I know I haven't included. One's the Cymbidium, because it's outside, and the other is my hardy terrestrial orchid, because it's outside. But I will pop them into a video at some point, probably when I'm outside. Anybody who's watched all of this, you deserve a medal, but as I did say, this is a record of my orchids that serves 2 purposes. One is to get some videos and just show everything I've got. But 2, it's a record of my orchids as they are at the start of the year, which I'm now going to tuck away and file safely so that I don't lose them. And then when I get to the end of the year, I can use them as a reference point. And then as I go round filming orchids, I can sort of say, you know, well, this is what it looked like at the start of the year, and this is how well it's done. So it serves 2 purposes, and yeah. It's been fun. I've had closer looks at orchids that don't get a close look very often. They just get some water thrown on them now and again and chucked back at the back of a shelf. So maybe a few surprises for some of you, especially if you're relatively new, about what I've actually got and what they look like. And we'll get back to some sort of normality now, whatever normal is for YouTube orchid videos. But thanks for sticking with it. As I said, anybody who's watched every single one of these, all 8 parts, all the way through, I don't know whether you actually realise, but that's 4 hours of your life you've spent watching my videos. And if you have, thank you very much. I don't think I could sit through 4 hours of that sort of thing, but as I said, they're a record for me as well. Anyway, thanks for the bits you have watched if you haven't watched all of them, or the parts you've watched if you haven't watched all of them, and your comments and things, and see you sometime.